Mountains used to be the ultimate shield. For decades, the world's most defiant regimes buried their crown jewels, nuclear centrifuges, ballistic missiles, and command centers deep beneath hundreds of feet of solid granite. They believed geography was their armor, rendering Western air power obsolete. But in a single silent flash over a desolate mountain range, that assumption vanished. A 30,000-pound message just proved that in the age of precision kinetic energy, there is no depth deep enough to hide from a superpower's reach. The world is not governed by treaties or international law. It is governed by the cold, hard reality of what can be destroyed and who has the means to destroy it. In the lexicon of great power realism, power is often defined by strategic depth. Historically, if you couldn't match an adversary's navy or air force, you retreated into the geography. You used the jagged peaks of the Zagros, the volcanic basalt of Yemen, or the granite massifs of the Korean peninsula as a physical barrier. This was the subterranean doctrine. The logic was simple. If you dig deep enough, you create a sanctuary. You force your enemy into a brutal choice. Either launch a massive bloody ground invasion to clear those tunnels, or accept that your most vital military assets are effectively untouchable. For the last 20 years, this doctrine has worked. From the tunnels of Tora Bora to the metro of Gaza and the hardened enrichment halls of Fordo in Iran, the earth itself was weaponized as a defensive shield. The United States, despite its overwhelming technological edge, seemed to have met its match in the bedrock. The 2,000-pound JDAM, the workhorse of the American arsenal, was a surgical tool, but it lacked the mass to punch through 60 meters of solid rock. This geographic immunity gave rise to a new sense of boldness among regional actors. If your brain and your arsenal are safe under a mountain, you can afford to be aggressive on the surface. You can fund proxies, harass shipping lanes, and build nuclear infrastructure because you believe your insurance policy, the mountain, is ironclad. But geography is a static variable, while technology is a dynamic one. The recent deployment of the B-2 Spirit, armed with the GBU, 5.7 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, has fundamentally rewritten the manual on conventional deterrence. This was not just a tactical strike against a Houthi storage site in Yemen, it was a high-level strategic demonstration of the end of sanctuary. To understand why this matters, we must look at the specific geography of the Red Sea. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait is a narrow choke point, a geographic jugular for global trade. The Houthis, backed by Iranian engineering and strategic doctrine, had turned the mountains overlooking this strait into a subterranean fortress. They weren't just storing weapons, they were projecting power from the depths of the earth onto the surface of one of the world's most critical maritime arteries. The crisis in the Red Sea was a direct result of this perceived geographic immunity. The Houthis believed that as long as their primary missile stocks were buried deep within the volcanic rock of northern Yemen, they could sustain a campaign of attrition against global shipping indefinitely. They could absorb surface strikes, move their mobile launchers in and out of tunnels, and maintain a persistent threat that forced the world's largest shipping companies to divert their fleets around the Cape of Good Hope. This was geography being used to nullify the power of the U.S. Navy. The shield of the Yemen mountains was causing a global economic disruption, and the traditional tools of air power were failing to reach the source of the problem. The decision to send the B-2 Spirit, a billion-dollar stealth platform from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, to the rugged terrain of Yemen was a calculated overmatch. The B-2 is the only aircraft in the world capable of delivering the GBU, 5.7 MOP. The MOP is not a bomb in the traditional sense. It is a 30,000-pound kinetic drill. It is a 30-foot-long cylinder of hardened steel designed with a single brutal purpose: to negate 60 meters of reinforced concrete or rock. When dropped from the edge of the atmosphere, it converts potential energy into a terrifying amount of kinetic force. It doesn't explode on impact. It uses its mass and its hardened nose to punch through the earth, burrowing deep into the target's core before a delayed action fuse triggers a massive internal blast. The strike in Yemen served as a live fire laboratory. By successfully neutralizing these hardened Houthi facilities, the United States was sending a real-time signal to Tehran. For years, the Iranian nuclear program has relied on the perceived impenetrability of facilities like Fordow and Natanz. Fordow, in particular, was built specifically to survive the best bunker busters available in the early 2000s. It was the centerpiece of Iran's strategic leverage. If Fordow is safe, Iran can negotiate from a position of strength. By proving that the MOP can destroy similar targets in Yemen, the U.S. has effectively informed Iran that their mountain shield has become a mountain tomb. The geographic depth they spent billions to create has been bypassed by 30,000 pounds of American steel and physics. As the dust settles over the impact zone, the tactical reality on the ground shifts into a much larger, more dangerous strategic calculation. This wasn't an isolated strike against a local militia. It was a calibrated demonstration of force directed at the heart of the regional power structure. The question is no longer what was destroyed, but who now controls the pace of escalation and what happens when the shield of the earth itself fails. In the world of great power realism, every military action is a signal sent into the void of international anarchy. The audience for the B-2's mission in Yemen was not the Houthi leadership. It was the supreme leader in Tehran, the military planners in Beijing, and the inner circle in Pyongyang. By using the B-2 and the MOP in a live combat environment, the United States was performing real-time deterrence. It was reestablishing the credibility of the conventional decapitation strike. This is a critical rung on the escalation ladder. In strategic theory, if there is a massive gap between your smallest tactical strike and your largest nuclear response, your adversaries will exploit that gap. They will operate in the gray zone, engaging in provocations that they believe are too small to trigger a war but too difficult to stop. The MOP fills that gap. It tells the adversary that their most protected assets, the ones they consider their ultimate insurance policies, are now within the conventional strike zone. This directly addresses what scholars call the stability-instability paradox. This paradox suggests that when two powers have nuclear weapons, they feel safe enough to engage in low-level conflicts because they know the other side won't risk a nuclear exchange. Iran has mastered this paradox for decades. They fund the Houthis to attack ships and Hezbollah to attack Israel, all while keeping their nuclear program safe underground as a deterrent against the direct U.S. response. The GBU 5-7 shatters this logic. It allows the U.S. to strike the safe core without resorting to nuclear weapons, lowering the threshold for intervention while increasing the risk for the adversary. The logistics of this operation are perhaps even more significant than the weapon itself. A B-2 mission from the continental United States to the Middle East is an 8,000-mile journey that requires an invisible global choreography. It requires a tanker bridge across the Atlantic, a fleet of KC-135S and KC-46S that must meet the B-2 at precise points in the sky to keep it fueled. It requires a resilient satellite constellation for GPS guidance and real-time command and control. This is a level of global reach that is currently unmatched by any other power. While China is developing the H-20 stealth bomber and Russia maintains its Tu-160S, neither has the demonstrated ability to conduct a stealthy, intercontinental strike with a 30,000-pound weapon against a defended target on the other side of the planet. This logistical prowess is the backbone of American hegemony. It allows the United States to operate from a position of permanent sanctuary. While Houthi drones might threaten a U.S. carrier in the Red Sea, they cannot touch the B-2's home base in Missouri. This creates a radical asymmetry in the cost of war. The adversary must defend every square inch of their territory, 24 hours a day, against a threat they cannot see and cannot stop. The U.S., meanwhile, only has to be successful once to destroy a facility that took a decade and billions of dollars to build. The psychological impact of this is profound. When a regime realizes that its impenetrable bunkers are actually high-tech coffins, the internal cohesion of that regime begins to fray. The technical experts, the scientists, and the generals, they all now know that the mountain above them is no longer a shield, but a crushing weight waiting to fall. The escalation logic here is also about the economic realism of modern warfare. Building a hardened underground facility like Fordow or the Houthi tunnel networks costs billions of dollars and requires years of specialized engineering. A GBU 57 MOP costs a fraction of that to produce. The United States can produce and deliver these weapons at a rate that far outstrips the enemy's ability to dig deeper. This is geological attrition. The U.S. is signaling that it is willing to engage in a race to the bottom, literally. If the enemy digs to 60 meters, the U.S. will refine its tandem strike capability, dropping 2 MOPs into the exact same hole created by the first. If they dig to 100 meters, the U.S. will simply increase the kinetic energy. The rock is a finite resource. American engineering is a flexible variable. This strike also targets the internal force posture of the adversary. When a regime realizes its bunkers are vulnerable, it must change how it stores its assets. It must move them. And the moment an asset is moved from an underground bunker to a mobile launcher or a surface facility, it becomes infinitely more vulnerable to traditional air power like the F-35 or the F-15. The MOP flushes the prey. It forces the adversary out of their geographic sanctuary and into the open, where the U.S. has total air supremacy. This is a force multiplier that affects every other branch of the American military. It makes the entire anti-access area denial strategy of countries like Iran or China much more difficult to maintain. If your hardened command and control center is destroyed in the first hour of a conflict, your entire defensive bubble collapses from the inside. Furthermore, this strike serves as a signal to regional allies. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel are watching these developments with intense interest. For them, American withdrawal from the Middle East was a terrifying prospect because it left them alone with an Iran that was too deep to hit. The B-2 strike restores their confidence in the American security umbrella. It proves that the U.S. doesn't need to keep 100,000 troops in the desert to be the dominant power. It can provide security through precision. This allows the U.S. to pivot to Asia while maintaining a kinetic overlordship in the Middle East. It is a way to manage regional balances of power with a smaller, more lethal footprint, using technology to bridge the gap left by a reduction in ground forces. With the credibility of underground sanctuaries shattered, the very foundations of regional defense strategies are crumbling. This technological breakthrough forces every major player to recalibrate their survival logic in real time. We are now entering a phase where the old rules of deterrence are dead, and the new map of power is being drawn by those who can strike from the shadows of the atmosphere. The long-term consequences of the death of the bunker will reshape the geopolitics of the 21st century. We are witnessing the end of the subterranean era of asymmetric warfare. For 30 years, tunneling was the primary solution for the lesser power in any conflict with the West. It worked in the jungles of Vietnam, it worked in the caves of Tora Bora, and it has worked in the urban canyons of Gaza. But we have reached a technological event horizon. If a superpower can combine persistent satellite-based surveillance, the eye that never blinks, with the ability to punch through 60 meters of granite, the depth of a territory is no longer a defensive asset. It is a liability. It creates a false sense of security that can lead to strategic catastrophe. Adversaries will now be forced to move toward hyper-dispersal. If you cannot hide under a mountain, you must hide in plain sight. This means we will see a shift from geographic defense to civilian shielding. Adversaries will move their nuclear programs, their missile batteries, and their command centers out of the mountains and into densely populated urban centers, under hospitals, schools, and apartment buildings. They are betting that the United States will be more restrained by the laws of armed conflict and the pressure of international public opinion than it was by 60 meters of rock. This is the weaponization of the international moral order, a shift from hard realism on the battlefield to legal realism in the court of world opinion. In the context of great power competition, specifically between the US and China, the MOP sends an even more chilling message. China has spent decades constructing its underground Great Wall, a massive network of tunnels designed to hide its mobile ICBMs and ensure a second strike capability in a nuclear exchange. They believe these tunnels made their nuclear deterrent survivable. The B-2 and the MOP demonstrate that survivability is now a relative term. If the U.S. can reliably penetrate and interdict those tunnels conventionally, it puts China's entire nuclear posture at risk. This creates a use it or lose it pressure on Beijing's strategic forces during a crisis, which paradoxically makes the world more dangerous. This is the tragedy of great power politics. A weapon that makes one side feel safer, like the MOP, makes the other side feel so vulnerable that they might be tempted to strike first. The impact on regional choke points is equally profound. The Houthis, and by extension the Iranians, thought they could control the Bab el-Mandeb because their source of power was in the mountains. By proving the mountains are not a sanctuary, the U.S. is reasserting its role as the guarantor of the global commons. It is telling every littoral state that if you try to close a global trade artery, your hinterland depth will not protect you. This has massive implications for the South China Sea. If the U.S. can strike hardened island bases or coastal missile silos with the MOP, the anti-access area denial bubbles that China's built over the last decade start to look much more fragile. The Great Wall of Sand becomes a great target of sand. We must also look at the alliance architecture. For decades, the American alliance system in the Middle East and Asia has been built on the promise of extended deterrence. But that promise was hollow if the U.S. couldn't actually reach the enemy's most vital assets. The MOP strike restores the teeth to American alliances. It allows countries like Japan, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia to stand firmer against regional bullies, knowing that the hammer of Missouri can reach the deepest bunkers in Pyongyang or Tehran. This reduces the pressure on these allies to develop their own nuclear weapons, which is a major victory for American non-proliferation goals. In a realist sense, the MOP is a tool for hegemonic stability, but there is a realist warning here as well. As the shield of the mountain fails, the desperation of the adversary increases. If a nation like Iran believes that its conventional bunkers can be destroyed at any moment, they may decide that their only real survival mechanism is a launched-on warning nuclear deterrent. They may move away from hardened survival and toward active threat. The death of the bunker doesn't mean the end of the conflict. It just means the conflict moves back to the surface, where the stakes are higher and the room for error is zero. The great power game has simply entered a more transparent and perhaps more volatile phase. We are moving from a world of hidden assets to a world of vulnerable centers. The B-2, Spirit, and the GBU 57 MOP have reaffirmed the fundamental law of the international system. Power is the only currency that never devalues. Geography, which has stood for millions of years as the ultimate arbiter of human conflict, has been bypassed by the ingenuity of aerospace engineering and the brutal application of kinetic force. The strategic depth of the 21st century is no longer measured in kilometers of rock or meters of concrete. It is measured in the resilience of networks, the precision of firepower, and the reliability of logistics. The strike in Yemen was a small event in terms of casualties, but it was a tectonic shift in terms of the global balance of power. It marked the moment the Earth surrendered its last secret. The death of the bunker is the birth of a new world order, one where nowhere is hidden and no depth is deep enough. In the cold, hard world of great power realism, there are no permanent sanctuaries, only those that haven't been targeted yet. The superpower has shown its hand, and the message is clear. The mountain is no longer your shield, it is your target. The sword has grown longer, heavier, and more precise. The only question that remains is who will be the next to realize that the ground beneath their feet is no longer solid, but a fragile skin over a target that has already been acquired. In the high-stakes game of global hegemony, the Earth itself has been demoted. The mountains have fallen, and the sky now belongs to the ghost that carries the 30,000-pound hammer. The ultimate reality of power is that it is never static. It is a constant race between the shield and the sword. For a moment, the world thought the shield had won by going deep into the earth. They were wrong. The sword has simply grown longer, heavier, and more precise. In the cold, hard world of great power realism, there are no permanent sanctuaries, only those that haven't been targeted yet.